The sun hung low over the Arizona plains, spilling gold across the land like a careless hand scattering coins. Dust rose from the hooves of cattle as they moved slow and stubborn through the sagebrush, their shadows stretching long against the dying light. Tom Callahan rode drag that evening, hat tipped low, a piece of straw between his teeth. He wasn't much for talking, most cowboys weren't, but he carried a quiet grin that came easy. The kind that made folks trust him before they even knew his name. It was branding season on the Bar T Ranch, and the day had been a Tom's back ached, his lips were cracked, and his throat was as dry as old mesquite. But as the herd slowed near the river, he saw something that made him forget the heat. On the far bank, gathering wildflowers, was a girl, young, maybe 10 or 11, but with a poise beyond her years. Her hair was dark and loose, catching the last rays of sunlight. She wore a faded buckskin dress and turquoise beads that flashed like bits of sky. Apache, Tom murmured to himself. There were several families camped upriver, friendly enough with the ranchers, trading hides and herbs for sugar or flour. The girl looked up and caught him staring. Instead of running off shy, she smiled, bold as daylight. "You're the one who rides the paint horse," she called across the water. Tom chuckled. "That's me, miss, and you must be the wildflower thief." She laughed, light and easy. "I'm not stealing. The river gave them to me." "Well now," he said, tipping his hat, "the river must think highly of you." Her smile grew wider. "You talk funny." "I talk cowboy," Tom said. "You'll learn it one day." She crossed her arms, mock serious. "Maybe I don't want to." "Oh, you will," he said with a teasing wink. "When you grow up, you'll marry a cowboy and talk just like him." She squinted at him through the sun's glare. "Marry a cowboy? Which one?" Tom laughed. "Reckon whichever one's fool enough to ask you." He paused, then grinned wider. "Maybe me." Her cheeks flushed red beneath the tan, and she turned away with a half smile. "You're too old," she called back. "I ain't that old," he protested, laughing. "Tell you what, when you're grown and I'm still kickin', you come find me. We'll see if the joke still stands." She said nothing more, but Tom noticed how she lingered by the water until he rode off, his laughter echoing behind him like the fading roll of thunder. That night, as the fire crackled and coyotes sang their lonesome tune across the desert, Tom thought about the girl by the river. He hadn't meant the joke to stick, just a bit of cowboy teasing to pass the time, but something about her eyes, deep and steady like still water, stayed with him. The next few months rolled by fast. Cattle drives, long rides, and poker nights at the Silver Spur Saloon filled his days. Yet every time he passed the river, he half expected to see her again, gathering flowers or chasing dragonflies through the reeds. But the Apache families moved with the seasons, and by autumn, their camp was gone. Tom told himself he'd forget her, that she was just a child, a face in the sunset. Still, sometimes when he bedded down under the stars, he'd catch himself smiling at the memory, the way she'd called him old, the glint in her eyes when she laughed. Years rolled on like dust storms. The Bar T changed hands, the river cut a deeper bend, and Tom grew into a man with lines on his face and a steady way about him. But some promises, even the ones made in jest, have a way of lingering. And far beyond the mesas, under a sky filled with stars older than memory, a young Apache girl grew into a woman strong, proud, and with a heart that remembered a cowboy's laughter at sundown. The seasons turned like the wheel of a wagon, slow and steady, and the little riverbank where Tom had first seen her became just another stretch of sun-baked land. Yet in the corners of his mind, that girl with the dark hair and defiant eyes never left. Tom Callahan rode the trails as he always had, his boots kicking up dust, the brim of his hat shading his eyes from the merciless sun. He'd become a man of reputation in the territory, respected not just for his skill with cattle or his marksmanship, but for a steady sense of fairness that drew people to him. Folks said a cowboy like him didn't come along often. One part grit, one part honor, and a streak of kindness hiding under that gruff exterior. But even as he worked hard and lived the rough rhythm of the West, there were nights when the prairie quiet became almost unbearable. That's when he'd see her again in his mind's eye, the small Apache girl standing by the river, cheeks red, hair glinting with the last rays of sun. She wasn't a child anymore, he told himself. She would be grown, strong, and wise as the land itself. Meanwhile, miles away, the girl was growing into a young woman named Kaya. Life had carved her with the same sharp edges as the desert rocks, but it had also painted her with grace, strength, and the stubborn pride of her people. Her mother often told her that the world beyond the mesas was dangerous, that men like Tom were fleeting shadows in a woman's life. Yet Kaya never forgot. She remembered the laugh, the straw in his teeth, and the promise made in just a promise that had lodged itself like a seed deep in her heart. Years passed, and the land changed slowly. Cattle ranches expanded, railroads crept closer to the horizon, and towns grew from clusters of tents into dusty storefronts. Tom's life was filled with work, but even in the busiest days, he found his mind wandering back to that riverbank. He often wondered what had become of the little girl who had dared to tease him, whose laughter still rang clearer than the bell at the town saloon. One evening, after a particularly long cattle drive, Tom rode into a town where the saloon doors creaked and swung in the wind. The air smelled of horse sweat, dust, and whiskey, a familiar comfort to him. He tied his horse and stepped inside, rubbing the weariness from his eyes. "Tom Callahan," a voice shouted from the back table, dragging him out of his thoughts. A few old ranch hands grinned at him, tipping their hats. "Heard you've been running those bar T herds like a king." Tom laughed, downing the last of his water. "Trying to keep Em alive long enough to pay me," he said, settling into the worn chair. Yet even as he joked, he felt the pang of longing for something he couldn't quite name. Meanwhile, Kaya had been traveling her own path. She'd learned the ways of the land from her people, skilled in tracking, riding, and surviving where many would falter. Yet she'd never let go of the memory of a cowboy who had once laughed at her like the river itself had sung. The years had made her patient, wise, and intentional. When the time felt right, she would return, but not as a child, chasing wildflowers. She would come back as her own force, determined and unyielding, carrying with her the promise of a long-held wish. Back in town, Tom stayed awake that night beneath the stars, listening to the wind whisper through the wooden planks of his cabin. He knew the world could change overnight, the river could dry, cattle could stampede, railroads could appear out of nowhere, but some things, he felt deep in his chest, were meant to endure. That laugh, that bold stare, that fleeting promise he had made on a whim at sundown. The river faded in the distance, the child he once knew vanished into time, but the memory endured. And as the desert night wrapped him in its cool silence, Tom Callahan, cowboy and wanderer of the plains, felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years, the quiet, stubborn hope that someday, somehow, the girl would come back. Because the West had a way of keeping its promises, if a man had the patience to wait, and a girl who had never forgotten the cowboy's words might just be the strongest promise of all. Years had a way of stretching the land thin, like sunlight spilling across the desert floor. Tom Callahan had grown taller in spirit than in body, his shoulders broader, his face lined with sun and wind. The Bar T Ranch was thriving, the herds healthy, and his reputation solid. But the memory of a girl by the river lingered like a stubborn shadow he couldn't shake. It was a warm autumn morning when she appeared. Tom had been inspecting the western pastures, riding slow behind a few straggling steers, when he spotted movement near the river bend. At first, he thought it was a traveler or a trader passing through. But as he drew closer, his heart stopped in disbelief. She was standing there tall, confident, and unmistakable. Kaya, the little girl who had once chased wildflowers, now returned as a woman. Her presence commanding as the desert itself. Her hair flowed dark as the night sky, and her eyes, sharp and steady, held the same spark he remembered from years ago. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of river and earth, and all the years melted between them. Tom's hand twitched at his side, as though reaching for a lasso he hadn't thrown in years. "Kaya," he finally said, his voice low, roughened by time and emotion. She smiled, but it wasn't the playful grin of a child. This was a measured, knowing smile, the kind that held both memory and intent. "Tom Callahan," she said, her voice soft yet steady, "I told you I'd come back." Tom felt a laugh escape him, half disbelief, half relief. "I didn't think you would. I thought that promise was lost to time." "Some promises," she said, stepping closer, "don't fade, even if the people do." The air between them seemed to crackle, filled with years of unsaid words and quiet longing. Tom studied her, noticing the grace in her stance, the strength in her hands that had once clutched wildflowers. She had grown into herself, tempered by the land and the life she'd led. Yet she carried the same bold spirit he had first noticed all those years ago. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing to a nearby log. Tell me how it happened, how you came to find your way back here." Kaya sat gracefully, brushing dust from her buckskin skirt. "I've been learning," she said simply, "learning the ways of the land, the ways of the people, and always keeping your promise in mind." She glanced at him, a playful glint in her eye. "You didn't think a little girl's joke would stick, did you?" Tom shook his head, a laugh rumbling from deep in his chest. "I surely didn't, but it did. Somehow. He rubbed the back of his neck, uncertain for the first time in years. I guess some things in this world are too stubborn to let go. Kaya leaned back slightly, looking out over the river. And some people, she said, are too stubborn to forget. The wind tugged at their hats, tugged at their memories, tugged at the edges of a life that had been waiting for this very moment. The world around them, the river, the sagebrush, the distant mountains seemed to hush, as if holding its breath. For a cowboy like Tom, used to long trails and lonely nights, the return of a familiar face after so many years was both unsettling and exhilarating. It reminded him that life had a rhythm he could not control, that destiny sometimes rode faster than a horse he could chase. And for Kaya, standing tall beside the river once more, she felt the power of time bending to her will. She had returned not as a child, not as a fleeting memory, but as a woman determined to claim a promise made years ago. Tom finally stood, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers lacing naturally, like two threads of the same rope finally pulled tight. "Welcome back," he said softly. "I never left," she replied. The river flowed steadily beside them, carrying the echoes of a promise whispered long ago. And for the first time in many years, the world felt complete, balanced by courage, hope, and the enduring stubbornness of love. The Arizona sun was high and relentless, beating down on the Bar T Ranch like it had a score to settle. Tom Callahan had seen many harsh days in his life, but none quite like this. Kaya's return brought with it a light he hadn't felt in years, but it also stirred shadows he'd long tried to ignore. Word of her arrival spread fast through the nearby towns and ranches. Some folks were curious, some skeptical, and some openly disapproving. A woman who had grown up among the Apache people was not always welcomed into a cowboy's world without whispers and sideways glances. Tom noticed it the way men lingered too long on the porch, the way ranch hands lowered their voices when she rode past. Kaya, however, moved as if she owned the prairie, and in a way, she did. Her gaze was steady, fearless, and unwavering. She had learned to carry herself through hardships that would have broken lesser people. Yet even she could sense the tension in the air. The West had a way of testing all who dared to stake a claim to love, honor, or land. It began one morning with a stray rider, a man named Red Morgan, known for trouble and whiskey-fueled grudges. He was a rival rancher, one who had clashed with Tom in the past over grazing rights and water claims. Red had always had a sharp tongue and a quick draw, and he carried resentment like a second gun at his hip. "Tom Callahan," Red said when he rode up to the Bartees corral, voice rough as the desert wind. "Heard you've got company." "A lady visitor. Strange sort for a cowboy to keep around." Tom narrowed his eyes, hand resting lightly on the butt of his revolver. Not because he expected trouble, but because he had learned long ago to be ready. "She's no one's visitor but her own, Red. You best ride on." Red sneered. "Funny, I remember a little girl down by the river years ago. Never thought she'd grow up to be a woman like this, coming to your doorstep. What are you, some kind of hero in her story?" Kaya stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. "You should watch your words, Reed. Some promises are stronger than your grudges." The two men exchanged a tense stare, dust swirling at their boots. Red scoffed and finally rode off, muttering under his breath. But the encounter left a shadow hanging over the ranch, a reminder that life in the West was never simple, especially when love, pride, and old rivalries collided. That evening, Kaya and Tom rode together along the riverbank, the fading sun painting the world in amber and crimson. Silence stretched between them for a while, a comfortable quiet, until Tom spoke. "I won't lie, Kaya. Some folks won't understand. They might try to drive us apart or question your place here. The West, it ain't easy for anyone, especially not a woman like you." Kaya looked at him, eyes reflecting the last glow of daylight. "I expected as much, but I've faced worse. And I'm not here to live in the shadow of anyone else's opinion. I came back for a reason. That reason is you, Tom." He felt the weight of her words settle over him, strong and unwavering. There was courage in her claim, a determination that matched his own stubborn spirit. For the first time in many years, he knew he wasn't alone in facing the West's challenges. But the shadows weren't gone. Whispers continued in town. Red Morgan's threats lingered. And beyond that, Tom knew the land itself could betray them. Cattle could stampede, droughts could strike, or a simple misstep on the trail could turn deadly. The West didn't forgive, and it didn't wait for lovers to catch up. That night, under a sky thick with stars, they sat by the fire outside Tom's cabin. Kaya hummed a soft tune, a song her mother had taught her, a melody that carried both sorrow and hope. Tom listened, letting the sound wash over him, feeling the weight of years lift just slightly. Whatever comes, she said finally, eyes meeting his, we face it together. Tom nodded, tipping his hat back to reveal a grin softened by relief. Together, he agreed. And so the night settled over the bartranch.com, but watchful, as if the land itself knew that storms were coming. Shadows of the past lingered. But Tom and Kaya had faced them together, and the promise, whispered by the river years ago, was still alive, stubborn as the West itself. The West was a hard place, and love in it was harder. Tom Callahan and Kaya soon learned that the world didn't pause for promises or memories. Every day brought new trials, each one testing the strength of their bond like a blacksmith hammering iron. It started with the cattle drives. The bar-T herds were larger than ever, sprawling across miles of sage and scrub. Tom rode from dawn to dusk, inspecting the stock, patching fences, and keeping an eye on trouble that could come from anywhere: rustlers, storms, or accidents on the trail. Kaya insisted on riding alongside him, learning the ropes of ranch life while proving she belonged. Careful with that steer, Tom shouted one blazing afternoon as a young calf bolted toward the river. Kaya managed to rope it expertly, earning a grin from Tom that carried a mixture of pride and disbelief. You handle a lasso like you were born with it, he said. I had a good teacher, she replied, eyes flashing mischievously. You think you can keep up with me, cowboy? Tom chuckled, shaking his head. I reckon I'll let you try. But not all challenges were as simple as a runaway calf. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas, a rider appeared on the horizon. Red Morgan again, this time with more than words. He had brought 2 men with him, armed and ready for trouble. You're meddling where you don't belong, Callahan, Red growled, spurring his horse closer. This land, these herds, they're mine, if I say so. Tom met his gaze evenly, hand resting near his revolver. I've dealt with men like you before, Red. You leave now, or you'll regret it. The air thickened, hot and tense, as Red's men circled the herd, shoving cattle toward the corral. Kaya stepped beside Tom, her presence a quiet force. You won't scare us, she said, voice steady. We're not afraid of you, or your threats. The standoff lasted long enough for dust to rise and the horizon to blur. Finally, Red spat to the side, realizing Tom's calm defiance and Kaya's unflinching courage left him no advantage. This isn't over, he warned, retreating with his men. Tom exhaled slowly, leaning against his horse. The West don't let us rest, huh? Kaya smiled faintly, brushing dust from her skirt. Maybe it just wants to see if we're serious about each other. Days later, a different kind of trial arrived. A violent thunderstorm rolled in from the north, sweeping across the plains with relentless fury. Rain pounded the earth, lightning cracked like rifles, and the river threatened to overflow its banks. The bar-T herd panicked, stampeding toward danger, and Tom and Kaya rode with all their might to round them up. In the chaos, Kaya's horse slipped on the slick ground, throwing her to the muddy earth. Tom was there in an instant, steadying her and the horse, his heart hammering in his chest. You okay? He shouted over the roar of the storm. I'm fine, she gasped, wind and rain soaking her hair and skin. But we can't let them get away. Together, they managed to guide the herd to safety, soaked to the bone, exhausted, but victorious. That night, as they huddled by a fire in a makeshift shelter, the storm outside was a mere whisper compared to the trials they'd faced. Tom looked at Kaya, her hair plastered to her face, eyes bright with determination. You're something else, he said softly. And so are you, she replied, smiling despite the mud and rain. The trials of the heart in the West were relentless threats from men. The wildness of the land, the unforgiving weather, but each trial only cemented what had begun years ago at the riverbank. They learned that love wasn't just in the quiet moments, the laughter, or the promises whispered at sundown. It was in the hard work, the courage to face danger side by side, and the stubborn will to protect what mattered most. As the storm cleared and the first stars peeked through, Tom and Kaya rode back to the bar-T ranch, side by side, their hands brushed, fingers entwined, and in that simple touch lay the quiet affirmation that they would face whatever the West threw at them together. And somewhere deep in the desert, the river remembered their promise, carrying it forward like the steady pulse of life itself. The West has a way of testing a man's mettle when he least expects it. For Tom Callahan and Kaya, the test came on a morning wrapped in haze. The sun struggling to burn through a blanket of dust and heat. The bar-T ranch had settled into its usual rhythm after the storm, but trouble had a long memory, and Red Morgan, fueled by pride and grudges, was about to remind them why the West never forgave eyes. Tom spotted the first sign while walking the northern fence line. Broken rails, hoof prints not belonging to his herd, and a scent of smoke in the wind. His jaw tightened. Red was back and he wasn't coming to talk. Kaya appeared beside him, her eyes sharp. "I knew he'd return," she said calmly, though her fingers brushed the butt of her revolver. "He never forgets." Tom nodded, adjusting his hat against the glare. "Nor do I." By mid-morning, the Barty corral was bustling. Ranch hands were armed and alert, horses tied and ready. Tom and Kaya rode the perimeter together, each horse's hooves kicking up dust like drums of war. Then, from the ridge, a cloud of dust signaled Red's approach. He rode with 5 men this time, rifles glinting in the sun, faces set with determination and malice. His voice carried across the prairie. "Callahan! Kaya! You've got to choice his hand over what's mine, or meet your end." Tom's hand rested on his revolver. "You'll get nothing," he replied evenly. "Leave now, Red, and I won't be forced to teach you a lesson you'll regret." Red laughed, a sound rough as gravel. "Lessons? You think a cowboy like you can stop me?" The confrontation escalated fast. The first shots rang out, echoing across the plains. Dust and gunpowder filled the air, horses reared, and cattle scattered. But Tom and Kaya fought not just with aim, but with experience. They moved in sync, blocking Red's men from the herd, forcing them back with sharp shots and strategic maneuvers learned from years on the frontier. Kaya's skill was undeniable. She moved like the wind, her rifle steady, her horse quick to respond to every command. Tom felt a swell of pride and awe. The girl who had once teased him by the river had returned as a force of nature, his equal in every way. Red Morgan, frustrated by their resistance, tried to flank them from the east, hoping to drive the herd into chaos. But Tom anticipated the move, signaling Kaya with a flick of his reins. Together, they trapped Red's men between 2 ridges, the cattle safely behind them. The battle ended as quickly as it began. Red, realizing he was outmaneuvered, dismounted and held his hands up, rage and humiliation burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he spat, before retreating with his men, leaving a cloud of dust and defeat in his wake. Tom and Kaya stayed on the ridge for a long moment, catching their breath. The prairie was quiet again, the only sound the soft snort of their horses and the rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. Kaya leaned against Tom, her shoulder brushing his. "That was too close," she murmured. Tom shook his head, eyes scanning the horizon. "The West doesn't give second chances. But neither do I, especially when it comes to you." For the first time in years, Tom realized something important. The true danger wasn't the land or the storms, or even the men who rode against him. It was the fleeting nature of life itself. Every moment could be the last, every promise could vanish with the wind, and that made what he felt for Kaya even more precious. As they rode back to the ranch, the sun dipped low behind the mountains, painting the world in gold and crimson. They didn't speak much, but each knew the other's thoughts. Trials had come, bullets had flown, and the West had tested their hearts. And yet, through every trial, their bond had only grown stronger. By the time they reached the corral, night had fallen, stars glimmering like scattered diamonds over the desert. Kaya dismounted, brushing dust from her skirt, and Tom caught her hand in his. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "we face it together." "Always." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Always." The Barty ranch settled under the vast western sky, quiet but alive, holding the promise of a new chapter. The shadows had come and gone, but the love forged through trials, courage, and stubborn hope endured stronger than any storm, any enemy, or any distance. And somewhere in the distance, the river whispered, carrying the story of a cowboy, a girl, and a promise that time itself could not erase. The Barty ranch lay quiet in the early morning light, bathed in a soft amber glow that made the desert sparkle like gold dust. The trials had passed, the storms weathered, and the rivalries settled for now. Tom Callahan and Kaya stood together on the ridge overlooking the river. The same river that had witnessed their first promise so many years ago. For a moment, they didn't speak. The wind tugged gently at their hats and hair, carrying the scent of sagebrush, earth, and the freedom of the open plains. Time had moved slowly and relentlessly, yet here they were, older, stronger, and unshakably bound to each other. Tom reached for Kaya's hand, roughened by years of ranch work, but steady and warm. "You know," he said, voice low, "I never thought this day would come. That little girl by the river, I thought she was just a memory." Kaya smiled, squeezing his hand. "Some memories don't fade, Tom. Some promises, they're meant to be kept, no matter how long it takes." The words hung between them like a prayer. Tom studied her face, seeing not the child he had once teased, but the woman she had become, brave, intelligent, and fierce in a way that matched the West itself. Every worry, every challenge, every long day on the ranch, had led them here. And now, the moment was theirs. He dropped to one knee, the earth beneath him solid and real, the wind swirling around them like a witness to the vow he was about to make. "Kaya," he said, voice steady but full of emotion, "I made a promise once, and it took a long time to keep it, but I swear to you, from this day forward, I'll never let you go. Will you marry me?" Kaya's eyes shimmered in the morning light. She knelt beside him, taking his weathered hands into her own. "Yes," she said simply, but with the weight of a lifetime behind it. "Yes, Tom. I've been waiting a long time, but I never doubted you'd keep your word." Tom pulled her close, letting the years of longing, trials, and adventure settle into a single heartbeat. Around them, the West seemed to hold its breath, as if the mountains, the river, and the desert itself were celebrating with them. The wedding was simple, as all true Western weddings should be. Friends and ranch hands gathered, horses tied and saddles polished, the sun casting long shadows over the dry grass. There was laughter, music from a fiddle, and the clink of coffee cups on a wooden table. But the real magic was in the quiet moments, a shared glance, a gentle squeeze of the hand, the certainty that love had survived every trial. Kaya wore a dress of soft cream-colored cloth, dusted with the faint scent of river wildflowers. Tom wore his best hat and boots, though his work-worn hands betrayed the years of toil he had endured. When they exchanged vows, their words were simple, honest, and true, a promise not just of love, but of partnership, respect, and a life lived together on the wide-open plains. After the ceremony, they rode together across the ranch, side by side. As the wind carried the scent of sage and dust into the horizon, their laughter echoed across the pastures, mingling with the lowing of cattle and the whisper of the river. The Bar T Ranch had always been a place of hard work and hardship, but now it held something more: hope, love, and the fulfillment of a promise that had withstood time itself. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas, painting the sky in golds and reds, Tom and Kaya sat together on the porch of the cabin. The world was quiet, save for the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the river. "You know," Tom said, tipping his hat back and smiling at the horizon, "I never imagined the West could feel this good, not just the land, but us, together." Kaya leaned her head on his shoulder. "It took time, but we got here. The West is still wild, still unforgiving, but so are we, and together, there's nothing we can't face." Tom took her hand in his, holding it like a lifeline, a promise renewed. "Always," he said. "Always," she echoed. And so, under the endless western sky, the cowboy and the Apache woman found their home. Their hearts bound by courage, patience, and love. The river flowed steadily below, carrying whispers of the past and promises for the future. And the Barty Ranch, once just land and cattle, became the testament of a love that had survived every trial, every storm, and every shadow of the past. The West remained wild, untamed, and ever challenging, but for Tom and Kaya, it was perfect, because they had each other, and that was enough. The promise had been kept, the story was theirs, and the frontier, vast and eternal, watched quietly, approvingly, as two souls rode into their life together.